The new discoveries here at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre happened during a recent restoration around the tomb of Jesus.
For centuries, millions of people walked across the same floor and never asked what was underneath it. In 2022, a routine inspection beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre uncovered something that was never supposed to be found, and what it confirmed forced everyone involved to put down their tools and walk away. Do you believe this discovery is real? Yes or no? Let us know in the comments. The floor that was never meant to be lifted. Millions of pilgrims have walked across the marble floor of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre across centuries of continuous use. They came from every corner of the world, from every Christian tradition, across every generation since the church was first built. They walked across that floor to reach the shrine built over the place where Jesus was said to have been buried. They prayed there. They wept there. They placed their hands on the stone and carried the memory of that contact for the rest of their lives. Not one of them had reason to wonder what was directly beneath their feet. In 2022, a structural inspection changed that. Engineers examining the church identified thin cracks spreading across the marble floor near the tomb shrine. Cracks in old stone are not unusual. Churches of this age develop fractures constantly, and most of them are cosmetic. These were different. The pattern of the cracking suggested something more than surface wear. Laser instruments brought in to measure the stability of the ground detected something that the engineers had not expected and could not immediately explain. The ground beneath the shrine was sinking, slowly, measurably, but without question. Something underneath the structure was shifting, and whatever was shifting was pressing against the stone above it. The implication landed immediately. If the ground continued to move, the shrine above it would eventually crack beyond repair. An emergency excavation, conducted without preparation and without the careful permissions the site required, would be forced. The only way to prevent that was to act first, deliberately and carefully, before the ground made the decision for them. What began as a concern about structural stability was about to become something considerably larger than anyone involved had prepared for. The problem of the status quo. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is not governed by a single authority. It never has been. The site is shared by several Christian denominations under an arrangement called the status quo, a centuries-old agreement that divides responsibility and access between different groups and requires unanimous consent before any physical change can be made to the structure. No stone moves without agreement from every party. No repair begins without approval from all sides. This arrangement has kept the peace across centuries of theological disagreement and political tension. It has also frozen the site in place in ways that have sometimes delayed necessary maintenance for years. The famous immovable ladder, a wooden ladder visible on a ledge above the entrance that has sat in the same position since at least 1757 because no single authority has been willing to claim responsibility for moving it, is the most visible symbol of what the status quo produces in practice. When the engineers presented their findings about the sinking ground, the denominational authorities faced a choice with no comfortable options. Do nothing and risk the shrine cracking under its own weight, or seek permission to excavate and open a process that no one could fully control once it began. Fear spread through the institutions involved. Engineers who wrote reports about what the instruments had found began softening their language. The word void was replaced with the word anomaly. The word chamber was avoided entirely. The reports described what the instruments had detected in the most cautious and least alarming terms available, because the people writing them understood that the implications of what they had found were far larger than a structural repair problem. Years passed in negotiation before permission was finally granted. When it came with strict conditions. Repair the floor. Record only what was required for the structural work. Move quickly. Speak as little as possible about anything beyond the immediate task at hand. The excavation began under those conditions. It did not stay within them. What the radar found beneath the stone. Before any physical excavation began, ground-penetrating radar was brought in. The purpose was practical. Engineers needed to confirm that the bedrock beneath the shrine was solid enough to support the reinforcements the floor required. Every historical record, every map, every previous survey of the site described solid limestone beneath the church floor. The expectation was that the radar would confirm what the records said, and the reinforcement work could proceed without complication. The technicians running the first scan froze. The signals coming back from beneath the tomb shrine were not the signals of solid rock. There were spaces where the limestone should have been, empty spaces, returning signals that indicated air rather than stone. The team recalibrated their instruments. They ran the scan again, then a third time, then a fourth. The results did not change. What the radar was showing them had a specific character that made the implications immediately clear to anyone reading the data. The shapes of the voids were not irregular. They were not the rounded, uneven formations that natural erosion or settling produces in limestone over time. The edges were sharp. The walls were straight. The dimensions were consistent and uniform in a way that natural processes do not produce. They were rectangular. They were tightly grouped, and they were centered directly beneath the tomb. Nature does not cut right angles underground. The bedrock beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre had been deliberately shaped by human hands. Control scans run in other parts of the church returned completely normal readings. The anomaly was specific to the tomb. No Vatican record, no Greek Orthodox archive, no Armenian historical document contained any reference to a structure beneath the tomb. Whatever was down there had been placed outside the official record entirely. The decision to repair the floor and move on quietly was no longer available to anyone involved. Something deliberate and ancient was waiting beneath the most sacred site in Christianity, and the instruments had already seen it. How Rome buried history underground. To understand what the excavation found below the radar anomalies, you need to understand what Rome did to Jerusalem after it fell. When Roman forces destroyed the city in 70 CE, the destruction was not random. It was systematic and intentional, designed not just to defeat a rebellion, but to erase the memory of what had existed before. The city that had stood was dismantled with the specific purpose of making it disappear. Emperor Hadrian rebuilt the site decades later as a Roman city called Aelia Capitolina. The rebuilding was designed to overwrite the Jewish and Christian geography of the place. Sacred sites were flattened. Roman temples were constructed directly on top of them. The intention was that future generations would know only the Roman version of the landscape and have no memory of what lay underneath it. Roman engineers did not always rebuild upward. Sometimes they destroyed downward. Rubble from demolished structures was packed tightly into the ground to seal what was below it, cutting off access and eliminating any visible trace of the layer that had been buried. When archaeologists reached the layer of fill directly beneath the church floor, what they found matched this method exactly. Stones broken to similar sizes, pressed together with force, even and dense in a way that clearly reflected intention rather than random collapse. This was not debris from a building that had fallen. This was burial, deliberate, methodical, and designed to make whatever was below it inaccessible and invisible. The irony of what Rome did is that the violence of the ceiling preserved everything beneath it. By packing the rubble so tightly and so completely, the Roman fill cut off the air movement, reduced oxygen levels, and limited moisture in the layers below. What should have decayed across 2,000 years of exposure was instead held in a condition that bordered on suspension. Rome buried the evidence. The burial accidentally became a preservation vault, and what was waiting inside that vault was about to rewrite the conversation about what had actually been at this site in the 1st century. The garden beneath the rubble. Below the Roman destruction layer, the ground changed completely. The character of what the excavation was moving through shifted from the tight, intentional density of packed rubble to something entirely different, and what it revealed was not what anyone had expected to find at this depth beneath this site. There was a quarry. The evidence was clear and specific. Limestone dust settled in patterns consistent with active cutting. Tool marks scarred the walls of the excavated space in the regular, deliberate pattern that quarrying produces. The stone itself carried the clear scars of block removal, places where sections of limestone had been cut away and taken for use elsewhere. This had been a working quarry in the 1st century, a site where stone was extracted from the ground for construction. Above the quarry floor, the character of the soil changed again. A layer of dark, fertile earth appeared, and this soil had not arrived there by wind or rain or natural accumulation. It had been imported deliberately. The difference between imported cultivated soil and the natural limestone dust of the quarry beneath it was not subtle. Someone had brought this earth here and laid it down with intention. The analysis of what was preserved in that soil layer removed any remaining doubt about what this space had been used for. Pollen grains, preserved across 2,000 years by the sealed conditions the Roman fill had accidentally created, were recovered and identified. Olive trees, grape plants, cultivated crops of the kind that do not grow wild but are planted and tended with care. Carved into the limestone beneath the soil were shallow planting beds, cut in neat, evenly spaced rows across the quarry floor. This was a private garden, not a decorative feature of a public space, a working, maintained, costly garden of the type that only wealthy private landowners constructed in the 1st century. And the Gospel of John, in its account of the crucifixion and burial, describes exactly this: a garden near the site of the crucifixion, a new tomb within that garden. For centuries, that detail was treated as atmospheric, unverifiable background. The ground beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre had just confirmed it in physical, measurable, chemical evidence. The garden had been real. What was inside it was waiting one layer deeper. The tomb that was barely ready in time. Beneath the garden soil, the excavation reached stone again. 1st century Jewish stone, cut in the specific manner that Jewish burial practice of the early Roman period required. Smooth burial benches carved at the precise height used for preparing a body, washing it, anointing it, wrapping it in linen. Every measurable detail of the chamber matched the elite Jewish tombs of that period that archaeologists have studied and documented elsewhere. The craftsmanship was careful and deliberate. This had been cut by people who knew exactly what they were building and why. And then the excavation found something that stopped the team in a way that the radar anomalies and the garden soil and the Roman rubble had not. On the western wall of the tomb, a burial niche had been started and never finished. The tool marks were still visible on the raw stone, not worn smooth by time or by the contact of human hands, raw. The marks of the cutting tools were still sharp, still present in the unfinished surface. This was not erosion. This was not the result of the niche being completed and then damaged. The cutting had simply stopped in the middle of the work. Whoever had been carving it had put down their tools and walked away before the niche was ready. In Jewish burial practice of the 1st century, tombs were completed before they were used. The preparation of the burial space was a specific and careful process, and beginning to use a tomb that was still under construction was not something that happened in ordinary circumstances. Yet the burial benches in this tomb showed clear evidence of use. The tomb had been occupied while the western niche was still mid-cut. Someone had been buried here before the chamber was finished. The Gospel of Mark records that the burial of Jesus was rushed. The Sabbath was approaching as the day ended. There was no time to spare. The body had to be placed before the Sabbath began. What the stone in that western wall was showing the excavation team was physical evidence of exactly that kind of urgency. The tomb had not been ready. It had been used anyway. The person buried here had not been expected to die when they did, and the tomb had barely been prepared in time to receive them. What the ground had just confirmed was not symbolic or interpretive. It was cut into the stone itself. The linen that should not have survived. Organic material does not survive 2,000 years in ordinary conditions. Cloth decays, oils break down, skin, hair, and other biological matter vanish across decades and centuries, leaving only traces detectable by the most sensitive instruments. The biological evidence of a burial disappears in the same inexorable way that all organic matter eventually disappears, broken down by moisture and oxygen and the constant activity of microbes and fungi. Stone survives, fabric does not. Bone survives longer than soft tissue, but eventually succumbs to mineralization or fragmentation. This is one of the fundamental constraints of archaeology at sites of this age. The past is rarely preserved intact, only hinted at in subtle residues and distortions of the material record. Which is why what the excavation team discovered inside the shallow grooves of the burial bench demanded immediate and repeated verification. They checked their instruments, they recalibrated, they repeated the collection, and when the results came back consistent each time, the implications became undeniable. Microscopic linen fibers had been recovered from the grooves. Invisible to the naked eye, these threads were captured using micro-vacuum collection tools designed for precisely this type of delicate recovery. Examined under high magnification, the fibers revealed a tight twisted weave pattern characteristic of first-century linen production. They did not match any root material, modern textile, or contamination introduced during centuries of human activity above the burial site. These were genuine remnants of a fabric that had once enveloped a human body. Chemical testing of the stone surfaces added a new layer of confirmation. Residues had been absorbed directly into the stone of the burial bench, and their chemical signatures matched aromatic burial oils, specifically myrrh and aloe, substances known from historical records to have been used in first-century Jewish burial practices for the care of honored dead. These were not ordinary substances. They were costly, reserved for deliberate funerary rites. Their presence indicated that the burial had been conducted with intentionality and care, a ritualized act of remembrance, not a casual interment. The convergence of evidence was striking. Linen fibers precisely where a wrapped body would have rested, oils absorbed into the stone beneath. Together, these findings pointed in one clear direction. A body had been laid upon that bench, wrapped and treated according to custom, its presence marked by the traces left behind in otherwise imperceptible threads and residues. The reason any of this had survived was as instructive as the evidence itself. Above the chamber, rubble from Roman construction had acted as a perfect seal. Air movement halted. Oxygen levels dropped. Moisture was cut off. The processes that normally cause organic decay were interrupted before they could run to completion. In an accidental act of preservation, Rome had sealed the evidence in place, freezing it in time for 2 millennia. What the team did not find was equally telling. No bones, no fragments, no residues that typically remain when a body decomposes fully within a stone enclosure. The linen fibers confirmed that a body had been placed there. The absence of all other material confirmed that it had not remained. Presence confirmed. Body absent. The bench, the fibers, the oils, each spoke silently of a human story, preserved only in trace, a testament to both meticulous ancient care and the fragile, fleeting nature of life itself. The chamber beneath the chamber. The radar data had shown 2 voids, not one. The first was the tomb the excavation had now fully examined. The second was directly beneath it, a second rectangular void, sharp-edged and geometrically precise, sitting at a consistent depth below the floor of the primary tomb. It appeared in no historical record. No archive from any of the denominations that shared the church contained any reference to it. It had been beneath the tomb, beneath the garden, beneath the Roman rubble, beneath 2,000 years of human presence above it, completely undisturbed. A micro camera was inserted through a natural fissure in the limestone. What it showed the team watching the feed stopped every conversation in the room. A second chamber, completely intact. The dust on its floor had not been disturbed. There were no footprints, no tool marks from any entry after the original cutting, no signs of collapse or settling that might have allowed material from above to contaminate what was inside. The walls were smooth and clean. The chamber had been sealed, accidentally or intentionally, at some point close to its original use, and had remained sealed from that moment until the camera entered the fissure. At the center of the chamber was a limestone bench. The edges of the bench were sharp. The surface was untouched. And on that surface, in a tight, concentrated cluster that the camera's instruments detected, were microscopic linen fibers. The same material, the same pattern, the same evidence of a wrapped form having been placed on the stone. The cluster was tight enough to suggest not a body at rest for an extended period, but a wrapped form set down briefly and then lifted again. There were no scratches on the bench surface, no drag marks on the floor, no evidence of looting of the kind that grave robbery always leaves behind. No evidence of decay of the kind that natural decomposition always produces. Grave robbery leaves chaos. Natural decay leaves residue. Neither was present. What the camera was showing matched no known practice in Jewish burial tradition, no known pattern of Roman tomb reuse, no documented form of any human activity that archaeology had encountered before. The team looking at the feed had no category for what they were seeing. The evidence was clear. The explanation was not. Why the excavation was halted. The decision to stop was not made because the site had become physically dangerous. The structural work the excavation had been authorized to perform had been completed. The floor could be repaired. The reinforcement could proceed. There was no engineering reason to continue. The reason the excavation was halted was the weight of what it had found. Every layer the excavation had moved through had confirmed the biblical account of the burial with a precision that no one involved had been prepared for. A private garden sitting above a first-century quarry, exactly as the Gospel of John describes. A newly cut Jewish tomb of the type used by wealthy families, consistent with the account of Joseph of Arimathea providing his own tomb. An unfinished burial niche and evidence of a rushed burial, matching the Gospel of Mark's account of the approaching Sabbath. Linen fibers and burial oils confirming a body had been placed on the bench. And a sealed, undisturbed chamber below, with evidence that something had been placed there briefly and then removed without a trace of how or why. Ordinary explanations had been eliminated one by one. Decomposition had not occurred. Relocation of the kind that leaves evidence of physical removal had not occurred. Theft of the kind that leaves the chaos of forced entry had not occurred. Later reuse of the chamber had not occurred. Every standard explanation for an empty tomb had been ruled out by the physical evidence in the ground. Archaeology cannot declare resurrection. That boundary is real, and it is not crossed by responsible science. What archaeology can do is examine physical conditions and eliminate explanations. At this site, under this tomb, the physical conditions matched the Gospel account, and the normal explanations for those conditions had been ruled out completely. To continue digging would be to force an official institutional conclusion from scientific institutions, religious authorities, and academic bodies that none of them were willing to make. The interpretive weight of what continued excavation might produce was larger than any of the parties involved were prepared to carry publicly. The site was sealed. The reports were filed. The floor was repaired. The excavation had reached a boundary that science cannot cross without entering the territory of meaning, and no institution involved was willing to be the one to step across it. What the ground finally said. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre has been standing above this ground for 17 centuries. Pilgrims have been walking across that floor for longer than most nations have existed. The site has been fought over, rebuilt, divided, negotiated and protected by more hands and institutions than can easily be counted. And beneath all of it, sealed by the violence of Roman destruction and preserved by the same seal that was meant to erase it, the physical record of what happened at this location in the 1st century was waiting. The ground confirmed the garden. The ground confirmed the tomb. The ground confirmed the rushed burial. The ground confirmed the linen and the oils. The ground confirmed the sealed chamber. The ground confirmed the absence. Nothing found beneath that tomb contradicted the biblical account. Every layer added a physical dimension to a story that had been carried for 2,000 years in text alone. The quarry became a garden. The garden contained a tomb. The tomb was barely ready in time. The body was wrapped and placed with care. And then, in conditions that eliminated every ordinary explanation, it was gone. What unsettles everyone who has seen the full record of this excavation is not that the evidence is ambiguous. It is that the evidence is not ambiguous at all. The site behaves exactly as described. The physical conditions match the account with a precision that archaeology at sites of this age almost never produces. The floor has been repaired. The chamber has been resealed. The reports sit in institutional archives, with language carefully chosen to describe what was found without committing to what it means. 2,000 years of weight pressed down on that ground, and for a brief window in 2022, the ground pressed back. What it said has not stopped being true, because the excavation ended. A structural inspection opened a question that 2,000 years of theology had never been able to settle with physical evidence. What the instruments found beneath that floor confirmed the garden, the tomb, the rushed burial, the linen, and the sealed empty chamber. Archaeology ruled out every ordinary explanation it had. The ground said what the text had always said. Subscribe so you never miss what they find next.